The classroom clock ticked louder than my heartbeat, but not loud enough to drown out Caleb's humming. He was at it again, sprawled across his desk, tapping his pencil like he was auditioning for a rock band. I glared at him, my patience thinner than the pages of my worn-out chemistry textbook. 17 years in suburban Ohio, and I, Finn Carter, had never met anyone as infuriating as Caleb Hayes. His voice always too loud, too bright, filled every corner of MS. Thompson's chemistry class, like he owned the place. By October of senior year, I'd memorized the rhythm of his distractions, the jokes, the random facts about stars, the way he'd lean over and whisper something stupid just to see me roll my eyes. But that night, under the flickering streetlights of our small town, I saw something in him that cracked my defenses wide open. It started with the usual chaos. Caleb was halfway through a story about a meteor shower he swore he'd seen last summer, his voice cutting through MS. Thompson's lecture on covalent bonds. "Finn, you ever look up and just feel small?" he asked, grinning like he hadn't just interrupted my attempt to take notes. I didn't answer. I never did. My life was a tightrope: keep my grades up, avoid my dad's drunken rants, and stay invisible. Caleb, with his bright green eyes and relentless energy, was the opposite of invisible. He was a spotlight I couldn't escape, and I hated how he made me feel seen. "Mr. Hayes, MS." Thompson snapped, her glasses slipping down her nose. "If you have so much to say, perhaps you'd like to explain molecular orbitals to the class." The room snickered. Caleb just shrugged, unfazed. "Nah, I'll leave that to Finn. He's the brain here." My face burned. I wasn't a brain. I was just trying to survive. Survive my dad's temper. Survive the whispers about my mom leaving when I was 10. Survive the fact that I didn't fit in, not with the jocks, not with the theater kids, not with anyone. Caleb, though, he fit everywhere. He was the guy who could charm anyone, who walked through life like it was a game he'd already won. That afternoon, as the bell rang, I shoved my books into my backpack, desperate to escape. Caleb, of course, had other plans. "Hey, Finn, you going to the bonfire tonight? It's at the quarry. Gonna be epic." "No," I muttered, slinging my bag over my shoulder. The quarry bonfires were for kids with perfect live skids who didn't have to check if their dad was passed out before walking through the door. "Come on, man, live a little," Caleb called after me, his voice chasing me down the hall. I didn't turn back. But that night, I couldn't stay home. Dad was in one of his moods, the kind where empty beer cans littered the floor and his voice shook the walls. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out, the cold October air biting my skin. I didn't plan to go to the quarry. I just needed to breathe. The quarry was a mile out of town, a jagged scar in the earth where kids gathered to drink, laugh, and pretend life wasn't complicated. I stayed on the edges, hidden in the shadows of the pines, watching the firelight dance on faces I recognized but didn't know. That's when I saw Caleb. He wasn't loud. He wasn't grinning. He sat alone on a log, staring into the flames, his shoulders hunched like he was carrying something heavy. For the first time, he looked breakable. I don't know why I stayed. I don't know why I cared. But when he looked up and saw me, his eyes held something I hadn't seen before: fear, raw and unguarded. "Finn." His voice was quiet, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. "What are you doing here?" I shrugged, my throat tight. Couldn't stay home. He nodded, like he understood, like he knew. And then he said, so softly I almost missed it, "Me neither." That was the moment I realized Caleb Hayes wasn't just the loud kid who annoyed me. He was hiding something, just like me. The bonfire roared, but the air between us was still. I sat beside him, the heat of the flames warming my face. And for the first time, I didn't mind his presence. He didn't talk, didn't joke, didn't hum. He just sat there, and I let him. We stayed like that for hours, the party fading into the background. When he finally spoke, his voice was a whisper. You ever feel like you're not who everyone thinks you are? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That question hung between us, heavy with truths neither of us was ready to say. The night stretched on, and I started to see Caleb differently. His loudness, his jokes, they weren't just noise. They were armor. And I wondered what he was protecting himself from. As the fire died down, he stood, brushing dirt off his jeans. Thanks for, not leaving. I nodded, my chest tight. Yeah. He walked away, his silhouette blending into the dark, and I knew something had shifted. Caleb Hayes wasn't just my annoying desk mate anymore. He was a mystery I couldn't stop thinking about. And I wasn't ready for what I'd find out next. The next day, Caleb was back to his usual self, or so it seemed. His laugh echoed through the cafeteria, his hands gesturing wildly as he told some story about a UFO sighting to a table of wide-eyed sophomores. But I couldn't unsee the Caleb from the quarry, the one who'd looked like he was carrying a secret too heavy to hold. I kept my head down, picking at my sandwich, trying to shake the memory of his quiet voice. You ever feel like you're not who everyone thinks you are? Those words clung to me, like damp clothes after a rainstorm. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but every time I looked at him, my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. In chemistry, he slid into the seat beside me, his grin as bright as ever. Yo, Finn, you finished the lab report yet? Bet you aced it. Working on it, I muttered, flipping open my notebook. His knee bumped mine under the desk, and I froze. It was an accident, probably, but it sent a jolt through me I didn't understand. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did. His grin softened, and he leaned closer, his voice low. You okay? You've been weird since the bonfire. I'm fine, I said too quickly, my cheeks hot. I wasn't fine. I was confused, angry at myself for caring about him, for noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Ms. Thompson started class, and Caleb went back to his usual antiques, doodling planets in the margins of his notes, whispering random facts about black holes. But now, I caught the cracks in his performance. The way his smile faltered when he thought no one was watching. The way his fingers fidgeted, like he was holding something back. After class, I lingered, pretending to organize my backpack. Caleb stayed too, messing with his phone. When the room emptied, he looked at me, his expression unreadable. You want to hang out later? Like, not at a party. Just us. My stomach twisted. Why? He shrugged, but his eyes were serious. Dunno. You're different. I like that. I didn't know what to say. Different. Me. I was just Finn, the kid who kept his head down and his secrets buried. But the way Caleb looked at me made me feel like he saw something else. Something I wasn't sure I wanted him to see. That evening, I met him at the town's old library, a brick building that smelled of dust and forgotten stories. Caleb was already there, sitting on the steps, his hoodie pulled tight against the chill. He looked up when I approached, and his smile was softer than usual, almost shy. Didn't think you'd show, he said, standing. Didn't think you'd be serious. I shot back, but my voice lacked its usual edge. We wandered inside, the librarian barely glancing at us. Caleb led me to a corner stacked with astronomy books, his fingers brushing the spines like they were old friends. This is my spot, he said. When I need to think. I raised an eyebrow. You think? He laughed, but it was hollow. Yeah, believe it or not, I've got a brain. We sat on the floor, surrounded by books, and he started really talking, about how he loved stars because they were constant, no matter what chaos was happening down here. About how his mom used to take him stargazing before she got sick, before she left him with a dad who barely noticed he existed. My dad's not like yours, he said suddenly, his voice low. He doesn't yell. He just doesn't care. I swallowed, my throat tight. I hadn't told him about my dad, but somehow, he knew. Maybe he'd seen the bruises I hid under long sleeves. Maybe he'd heard the rumors. Sorry, I mumbled, not knowing what else to say. He shook his head. Don't be. Just don't tell anyone. Okay. I don't want people knowing I'm not, you know, the happy guy all the time. I nodded, and something unspoken passed between us. A trust, fragile but real. We stayed until the library closed, talking about nothing and everything. When we stepped outside, the night sky was clear, stars scattered like spilled sugar. Caleb pointed out constellations, his voice soft and reverent. I listened, not because I cared about stars, but because I cared about him. And that scared me more than anything. The weeks that followed felt like walking on a frozen lake, every step careful, every moment waiting for the ice to crack. Caleb and I weren't friends. Not exactly, but we weren't strangers anymore either. In chemistry, his jokes still annoyed me, but now I caught myself smiling sometimes, my guard slipping despite my best efforts. At home, things were worse. Dad's drinking had hit a new low, and I spent most nights locked in my room, headphones on, trying to drown out his shouting. I didn't tell Caleb, but he seemed to sense it. He'd linger after class, making dumb excuses to walk with me, like he knew I needed the company. One Friday, he caught me in the hall, his eyes bright with an idea. There's a meteor shower tonight. Want to watch it with me? I know a spot by the lake. I hesitated. Spending time with Caleb outside school felt dangerous, like stepping too close to a fire. But the thought of another night at home, listening to Dad's rants, was worse. Fine, I said, but no talking the whole time. He grinned. Deal. That night, we biked to the lake, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Caleb's spot was a clearing tucked away from the main path, where the grass sloped down to the water's edge. We spread a blanket he'd brought, and for once, he was quiet, his eyes fixed on the sky. The meteors were faint at first, just streaks of light you'd miss if you blinked. But as the night deepened, they came faster, bright and fleeting. Caleb's face lit up with each one, like he was seeing something holy. Beautiful, right? He whispered, breaking his promise. I nodded, my chest tight. It wasn't just the meteors. It was him, his awe, his vulnerability, the way he made the world feel bigger than my problems. Then he turned to me, his face half lit by moonlight. Finn, can I tell you something? My heart pounded. Yeah. He took a breath, his hands twisting in his lap. I'm not like other guys. I mean, I like girls. Sure. But I also like guys. Like, a lot. The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. I didn't know what to say. I'd heard the rumors about kids like that, the slurs thrown around in the locker room. But this was Caleb. My Caleb. The guy who made me laugh even when I didn't want to. Okay, I said finally, my voice barely audible. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. You don't hate me? No, I said, and I meant it. I could never hate you. He exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping him. Good. 'Cause I was freaking out about telling you. We sat in silence, the meteors streaking above us. I wanted to say something, to tell him I was confused, that I didn't know what I felt, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I reached out and squeezed his hand, just for a second. He squeezed back, and it was enough. The ride home was quiet, but it wasn't awkward. It was like we'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. At school, things changed. Caleb was still loud, still the life of the party, but now I saw the effort it took. The way he watched people's reactions, the way he deflected questions about his personal life. I started noticing things I hadn't before, like how he never talked about dating, how he tensed up when certain guys got too close. And I noticed myself. The way my heart raced when he leaned too close in class. The way I wanted to protect him, even though I could barely protect myself. Winter came early, blanketing our town in snow and silence. Caleb and I fell into a rhythm library hangouts. Late-night texts about nothing. Stolen moments in the chemistry lab where we'd pretend to work but end up talking about everything except school. I still didn't know what we were, but I knew I didn't want it to stop. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Saturday, and I was at the diner, working a shift to cover Dad's latest bar tab. The place was dead, just a few truckers nursing coffee at the counter. Caleb walked in, his hoodie dusted with snow, his face pale. "Finn," he said, sliding into a booth. "I need to talk." I wiped my hands on my apron, my stomach sinking. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer right away. His hands were shaking, and his eyes were red, like he'd been crying. "My dad, he found out." "Found out what?" I asked, though I already knew. "About me. About who I am." His voice cracked. He saw a text on my phone. From a guy I met online. He flipped out. "Finn." Called me things I can't even repeat. I sat across from him, my heart pounding. "What happened?" "He kicked me out," Caleb said, his voice barely a whisper. "Told me not to come back until I'm fixed." The word hit me like a punch. Fixed. Like Caleb was broken. Like he wasn't the brightest, kindest person I knew. "Where are you staying?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged, staring at the table. "I don't know. I've got some cash. Maybe a motel." "No," I said, too fast. "You're staying with me." He looked up, his eyes wide. "Finn, your dad. I'll handle it," I said, though I had no idea how. All I knew was I couldn't let Caleb face this alone. That night, I snuck him into my room through the window, my heart racing every time the floor creaked. Dad was passed out on the couch, the TV blaring, but I wasn't taking chances. Caleb sat on my bed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "Thanks," he whispered. "For this?" I nodded, my throat tight. "You'd do the same for me." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't know how much this means." We didn't sleep much. We talked instead. About his dad. About mine. About the weight of secrets we'd both carried for too long. I told him things I'd never told anyone about Mom leaving. About the nights I hid in my closet to escape Dad's fists. And he listened. Really listened. Like I was the only person in the world. By morning, I knew I was in trouble. Not just because Caleb was in my room, but because I was falling for him. Hard. And I had no idea what to do about it. Hiding Caleb in my room wasn't sustainable. Dad was unpredictable, and the last thing I needed was him finding a runaway in my closet. But every time I looked at Caleb, curled up on my floor with a borrowed blanket, I knew I couldn't send him away. We came up with a plan. He'd crash at the library during the day, blending in with the study crowd, and I'd sneak him food from the diner. At night, He'd come back to my place, slipping through the window like a ghost. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. At school, we kept up the act me, the quiet kid, him, the loud one. But now, every joke he told felt like a secret shared just with me. Every time his hand brushed mine, it sent a spark through my veins. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself I was just helping a friend. But the truth was louder than Caleb's laugh. I was falling in love with him. One night, as we sat on my bedroom floor, splitting a stolen slice of pie, he looked at me with those green eyes and said, "You ever think about, being with someone? Like, really being with them?" My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, picking at the crust. "I dunno. Just wondering if you've ever felt something for someone you weren't supposed to." I swallowed, my mouth dry. "Maybe." He looked at me, his gaze steady. "Finn, I'm not good at this. But I think I like you. More than I should." The room spun. I wanted to say it back, to tell him I felt the same, but fear clamped my chest like a vice. What if this was a mistake? What if I wasn't like him? What if I was just confused? "I don't know what I am," I admitted, my voice barely audible. He nodded, like he'd expected it. "That's okay. You don't have to know. Not yet." But I wanted to know. I wanted to be sure. Because the way he looked at me made me feel alive in a way I hadn't since Mom left. The next day, school was a blur. I couldn't focus, not with Caleb's words echoing in my head. During lunch, I caught him staring at me from across the cafeteria. And for once, he didn't smile. He just looked scared. Like he'd said too much, shown too much. That night, he didn't come to my window. I waited until midnight, my stomach twisting with worry. When I texted him, he didn't reply. Panic set in. Had he gone back to his dad? Had something happened? I grabbed my bike and rode to the library, the only place I could think to look. It was closed, but I found him sitting on the steps, his face buried in his hands. "Caleb," I called, my voice shaking. He looked up, his eyes red. "I didn't want to bother you. I can't keep doing this. Finn." Hiding. Pretending. I sat beside him, the cold stone biting through my jeans. "You're not bothering me. You're the only good thing in my life right now." He laughed, a bitter sound. "That's sad, man." "Yeah," I said, and we both laughed. The kind of laugh that hurts because it's true. We sat there, the night pressing in around us, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to let him face this alone. Not anymore. The next week was a tightrope walk. Caleb stayed with me, but we were running out of time. Dad was starting to notice things: missing food, my late nights, the way I flinched when he asked where I'd been. I knew we couldn't keep this up forever, but I didn't have a better plan. At school, rumors started swirling. Someone had seen Caleb sneaking out of my house. Someone else claimed they'd seen him at the library, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The whispers followed us, sharp and cruel. Freak. Weirdo. I heard them, and I knew Caleb did too. He tried to laugh it off, but I could see the cracks. His jokes were forced, his smile brittle. One day, in the locker room, a group of jocks cornered him, their voices low and menacing. I didn't hear what they said, but I saw Caleb's face pale, defiant, but scared. I stepped in, my heart pounding. "Back off," I said, my voice louder than I meant. The leader, a guy named Jake, sneered. "What's it to you, Carter? You his boyfriend now." The word hit like a slap, but I didn't back down. "Leave him alone." They laughed, but they left. Caleb didn't look at me. just grabbed his bag and walked out. I followed, my chest tight with anger and something else, something I was too scared to name. That night, we sat on my roof, the stars hidden by clouds. Caleb was quiet, his knees pulled to his chest. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for dragging you into this." "You didn't drag me into anything," I said. "I'm here because I want to be." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "Why?" I took a breath, the words heavy on my tongue. "Because I think I love you." The silence was deafening. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind that lit up his whole face. "Took you long enough to figure it out." I laughed, relief flooding through me. "Shut up." He leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine. "Finn, I'm scared. About what this means. About what happens next." "Me too," I admitted. "But we'll figure it out. Together." For the first time, I believed it. But the world wasn't done with us. The next day, Dad found Caleb's jacket in my room. He didn't ask questions, she just started yelling, his fists clenched. I stood between him and Caleb, my heart racing, and told him the truth. "He's my friend," I said, "and he's staying here." Dad's face twisted with rage. "Not in my house." "Then I'm leaving too," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Caleb grabbed my arm. "Finn, don't." But I was done hiding. Done pretending. I packed a bag, and we left, the night swallowing us whole. We ended up at the diner, the only place open at midnight. My boss, Maria, took one look at us two scared kids with nowhere to go and gave us coffee and a booth in the back. She didn't ask questions, just told us we could stay until she closed up. Caleb was quiet, his hands wrapped around his mug. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Stand up to your dad. For me." "I did it for me too," I said. "I'm tired of being afraid." He nodded, his eyes soft. "You're braver than you think, Finn." I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was falling, with no idea where I'd land. But Caleb's hand found mine under the table, and for the first time, I didn't pull away. Maria let us crash in the diner's storage room for a few nights, but we knew it wasn't a long-term fix. We started making plans, real plans. Caleb had an aunt in Chicago who'd always been kind to him, who didn't care about who he loved. I had a cousin in Columbus who might take me in. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. At school, things got worse. The rumors had turned into open taunts. Someone spray-painted a slur on Caleb's locker, and I saw the hurt in his eyes before he covered it with a laugh. I wanted to scream, to fight, but Caleb just shook his head. "They're not worth it," he said. But I was done letting people hurt him. I went to Ms. Thompson, told her everything, not about us, but about Caleb's dad, about the bullying. She listened, her face softening, and promised to help. She connected us with a counselor, who found Caleb a temporary foster home with a family who didn't care that he was bi. I stayed with my cousin, a quiet guy who didn't ask too many questions. It wasn't home, but it was safe. And every night, Caleb and I texted, our words a lifeline across the miles. Slowly, we started to heal. Caleb joined a support group, found people who understood what he was going through. I started therapy, working through the scars my dad had left. It wasn't easy, but it was a beginning. And through it all, Caleb was there. Not the loud, annoying desk mate, but the real Caleb, the one who'd trusted me with his truth, who'd made me want to be better. Spring came, and with it, graduation. Caleb and I stood side by side in our caps and gowns, the Ohio sun warm on our faces. We'd made it through the fights, the fear, the nights we thought we'd break. Ms. Thompson pulled us aside after the ceremony, her eyes shining. "I'm proud of you both," she said. "You're stronger than you know." Caleb grinned, his old spark back. "Thanks, Ms.T. Couldn't have done it without you." She waved him off, but I could tell she was touched. That summer, we moved to Chicago together. Caleb's aunt took us in, her house full of warmth and laughter, the kind I'd forgotten existed. We got jobs, started community college, and built a life one where we didn't have to hide. One night, we went back to the lake, the place where Caleb had first told me who he was. The stars were out, brighter than ever, and we lay on the same blanket, our hands intertwined. "I used to think I'd always be alone," Caleb said, his voice soft. "But then I met you." I turned to him, my heart full. "You were never alone. You just made a lot of noise so no one would notice." He laughed, the sound bright and free. "Yeah, but you saw through it." We kissed under the stars, and it felt like a promise not just to each other, but to ourselves. To live honestly, to love fiercely, to never let fear win again. Years later, we'd look back on that year on the bonfire, the library, the diner, the lake, and see it for what it was, the moment we became us. Not perfect, not fearless, but real. And that was enough.